Hi. In our last segments, we were talking about the Inquisition that had already busted out at Brooklyn Bethel during the absence of Ray Franz on leave of absence in Alabama with Peter Gregerson, and back at Bethel, even in the absence of Lyman Swingle, who was the head of the writing department at this particular time, and Ray Franz, who of course was prominent upon it. The Inquisition and the interrogation had begun, and the principals who were involved at this point were primarily Ed Dunlap, Chris Sanchez and his wife Norma, Rene Vasquez and his wife Elsie, and brother called Nestor Quillen and his wife Tony. So at this point, Harley Miller now phoned Rene Vasquez and asked him if he would come to the office, saying, "We just want to pick your brains a little on some points." The chairman's committee had arranged for investigating committees to be formed to handle the interrogation of these different ones. With the exception of Dan Sidlick, all the men on those committees were still staff members outside the governing body. The governing body, through its chairman's committee, directed all the actions, but from this point on remained in the background. They now arranged to have the various men serving on these investigative committees listen to portions of the 2-hour tape that had been played to the body so as to equip them for their committee action. That is why these committees used my name, that is Ray's name, and Ed's name, Ed Dunlap, repeatedly in their questionings of Sanchez, Quillen, and Vasquez. Yet the chairman's committee had still not seen fit to inform us that the tape even existed. Why? The objective of the investigating committees was evident from the direction their questionings took. The committee interrogating Nestor Quillen asked him to describe his personal conversations with Ed Dunlap and myself. He replied that he did not think his personal conversations was something others had a right to inquire into. He made clear that if he felt that anything wrong or sinful had been said, he would not hesitate to inform them. But this was certainly not the case. His questioners told him he should cooperate, or he would be subject to possible disfellowshipping. His response was, "Disfellowshipping for what?" The reply was, "For covering over apostasy." Quillen said, "Apostasy? Where is the apostasy? Who are the apostates?" They answered that this was still being determined, but they were quite sure that such existed. This is somewhat like a man's being threatened with imprisonment unless he cooperates by giving information about certain persons, and when he asks why, he's told that the imprisonment would be for complicity in a bank robbery. When he asks what bank was robbed and who are the robbers, he's told, well, we don't yet know which bank was robbed or who did it, but we're quite sure there was a bank robbery somewhere, and unless you answer our questions, we will find you guilty of complicity, and you will be subject to imprisonment. Nestor explained that he had studied in Gilead School under Ed Dunlap as one of his instructors, and so knew him since then, and that he had known me from the time I served as a missionary and branch overseer in Puerto Rico. He acknowledged that he had conversed with each of us on occasion, but that those conversations involved nothing sinful or bad and were his personal affair. By April the 22nd, when Albert Schroeder responded to my request and phoned me, the judicial machinery of the organization was in full operation and moving rapidly. As chairman of the governing body, he, better than anyone else, knew all these facts, for all the investigating committees involved were under the direction of the chairman's committee. He knew that his committee had had the earlier mentioned 2-hour tape played by the governing body 1 week before his phone call. That's the phone call that Schroeder had made at Ray Franz's request to Alabama while he was on leave of absence. He knew that the various investigating committees had all been briefed, hearing portions of the tape, and that at the very time he spoke to me, they were using my name, along with that of Ed Dunlap, in their interrogations. He knew that the extremely grave charge of apostasy was included in the committee hearings. He had to know the very serious effect this could have on us two men he had known for decades, men he called his brothers. What then was said to me in his phone conversation? Consider. After a brief exchange of greetings, I said, "Tell me, Bert, "What's going on in the writing department?" His reply was, "Well, the governing body thought it well that some of us make an investigation of the department to see what could be done to improve the coordination, cooperation, and efficiency of the department, and to see if any of the brothers had reservations on some points." This final expression as to persons having reservations was stated in a rather offhand way, as if of secondary importance. He had clear opportunity to tell me the facts as to what was taking place. He chose not to do so. I then asked what reason there could be for such a full-scale investigation. He now had a second opportunity to give me an honest explanation of the situation. His answer was, "Well, the department isn't operating as efficiently as it should. The book for this summer's convention is going to be late getting to the factory." A second time, he chose to give an evasive answer rather than a straightforward reply to my question. As to his statement, I replied that this was nothing new, but that the previous year, both the commentary on the letter of James, which was written by Ed Dunlap, and the book Choosing the Best Way of Life, which was written by Reinhard Lengtat, had reached the factory by the first part of January, in good time. I knew this since it was my assigned responsibility to see that these books were developed on time. The book for 1980, titled Happiness, How to Find It, being written at that time by Gene Smalley, who had never even written a book before, and the project was not under Ray Franz's supervision. I added that I didn't see why this should be cause for such an investigation. Schroeder continued, "And then some of the brothers aren't very happy about the way their articles are being reworked. Ray Richardson said he had turned an article in," here he gave the subject of the article, "and he was very unhappy with the way it was worked over." I said, "Bert, if you know anything at all about writers, you know that no writer likes to have his material undergo surgery. But that is nothing new either. As long as there's been a writing department, it's been that way." "What does Lyman," that is Lyman Swingle, the coordinator of the writing department, "what does Lyman think about this?" He replied, "Oh, Lyman isn't here now." "I know he isn't there," I answered. "He's on his own trip. Have you written to him?" "No," he said. I then stated, "Bert, I find this very strange. If, for example, Milton Henschel, who was the coordinator of the publishing committee, which supervises all factory operations, were away, and another member of the publishing committee were away, let's say Grant Suter, and reports came to the governing body that the factory there was not functioning as efficiently as it should, do you think that the governing body would begin a full-scale investigation of the factory and its operations in the absence of those two brothers?" I knew such an action would not even be contemplated. He hesitated somewhat and said, "Well, the governing body asked us to do this, and we're simply making a report to them. We're going to make our report tomorrow." My response was, "Well, I'd appreciate it if you would express my feelings on the matter. I think it's an insult to Lyman Swingle, to the man, to his years of service, to his position, to take an action like this without consulting him or even letting him know." Schroeder said he would convey this expression. I added that if there was anything of genuinely great importance that required discussion, I could always go up there. He said, "You could?" I replied, "Of course I could. It would simply be a matter of taking a plane and going up there." He asked if I could come the following Wednesday. I replied, "What would be the purpose if Lyman Swingle won't be there then?" And the conversation ended there. This evasion and this conspiratorial secret maneuverings going on behind the scene while two members of the governing body, actually three, because Milton Henschel was apparently gone for much of this time, while they were not there, all these maneuverings going on are such a contrast to what you see in the New Testament, for example, in the book of Galatians, where Paul talks about an otherwise unknown incident where brothers came down from Jerusalem and Peter, who had had table fellowship with the Gentiles up until this point, under the pressure of the Jewish brothers being present rather than pregnant, compromised by not eating with the Gentile brethren, and how Paul reproved him Not privately, not in a governing body session. You can imagine that Paul and Peter, if there was a governing body in the first century, they would have been members of it. But in the presence of these brothers who would cause the controversy, and in the presence of Barnabas, apparently, another governing body member, if ever there was one, in the presence of all of them, he reproved Peter and said he stood condemned. So this spirit of public confrontation, not desirable, but it's the way the apostles even did it in the first century. And we'll go to another example or two later in later segments. In the next segment, we continue the discussion of the development of the Inquisition at headquarters.